bioequivalence is how they establish a generic drug, whether it's human or animal. They have to be bioequivalent, which means they have to be similar to each other.
Right.
So
Yes.
in most typical ways, that's done the generic product. The same manufacturing requirements are put in place for a generic product compared to the pioneer or the original approval.
Okay.
Where the difference comes is on a brand new approval, since we know the FDA knows nothing about the product, they require extensive efficacy testing to make sure the drug works, a lot of safety testing to make sure it's safe to the animal, but also safe for human consumption when we're talking about food animals. Generic companies don't have to do that safety and efficacy testing. They do what's called a bioequivalence study.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast. I'm your host, Brandy Buzzard, and it's my pleasure to bring you the latest trends and issues from the best and brightest minds in the beef industry. Today, we are joined by Dr. Rob Hunter, who earned his master's from Texas A&M University and his PhD from Louisiana State University. He has worked on behalf of animal and human health for more than 3 decades and has made meaningful impact in many roles at Kansas State University, Elanco, Pfizer, and many other organizations. He now leads One Medicine Consulting as the CEO, where they strive to enhance animal health science through innovation and collaboration. We've got a lot to talk about today with Dr. Hunter because we have tried to have this episode multiple times and I keep having to reschedule. So I'm so glad that we can have this episode today, which is sponsored by Virbac. So with that, let's dive right in. Finally, welcome to the podcast, Dr. Hunter. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. I mean, I really appreciate I'm glad we could figure everything out and get it working. So this is just awesome.
Yes, I appreciate it. I'm really happy you're here. I appreciate the grace and the flexibility because it seems like just one thing after another kept happening. So I appreciate you sticking with us and being willing to hang in here with us and get on the podcast.
No problem.
To start off with, I gave a very brief bio about you, but you've been in the industry for more than 3 decades. So if you just want to maybe bring us up to speed on your background, how you got started in the beef and cattle industry, and just your career so far, that would be wonderful.
Ooh, I'll do my best. So yeah, I kind of started out. I mean, I grew up a 4-H kid in Texas, so was around dairy cattle, beef cattle, the whole bit. Did an undergrad degree in West Texas at Angelo State. Got to go out and work on the farm because they had a research farm there and everything. I grew up raising sheep, which aren't. They're not smaller versions of cattle, but still heavily involved. I had a real keen interest growing up between putting the biology and the chemistry together. So all throughout my training, I've become a veterinary pharmacologist. So it's all about trying to merge for me that chemistry, the animals, livestock, and just being able to make sure and bring new products forward to the industry, independent of what species of food animal. But most of my career, I mean, I've been involved with a lot of beef cattle products over the years at Pfizer and at Elanco. So it's been really helpful and really nice to help bring that innovation forward.
Give your cattle platinum protection with Virbac's new Bovagen Platinum vaccines. These 4 vaccines deliver quality protection against respiratory and reproductive diseases in the vaccine combinations you need to protect cattle at every life stage. Bovagen Platinum vaccines are comprehensive and safe, have consistent supply made in the United States, and are backed by a 6-month guarantee in the Bovagen Platinum Protection Program. Start your platinum protection at us.virbac.com/platinum protection or contact your Virbac representative.
So you said veterinary pharmacologist, which is a term I feel like I hear very often. So how does that, how do you work with veterinarians as you're developing, these products and working on behalf of animal health?
In a lot of cases, what I'm doing is kind of helping doing the early stage studies, or even some of the residues. My background is heavily on pharmacokinetics, human food safety, and residues. So all of that kind of goes together from how do you determine withdrawal times? How do you figure out the product's safe for human consumption? At what level does it need to be? So that's where I bring that information to the veterinarian so they can make good, positive decisions on how to treat their animals with these new products, making sure we've done the right studies to satisfy FDA, but also to help the veterinarian use them appropriately, follow the withdrawal times, be able to communicate that to the producers so that they don't end up with violations. And then should they need to go extra label in a few cases where things just don't match up with what the label claims are, I can help provide some information to them or to other organizations that have a little bit more data, such as FARAD, Food Animal Residue Avoidance Data Bank, give them the information they need to help support the veterinarian. So I always see my role as helping support that veterinarian make good choices, make the best care for the animal, and be able to move forward for the producer.
It sounds like a very thorough process, right? It's not just, I think it's important for people to know that maybe aren't involved in animal health or don't work closely with it on a regular basis. Pharmaceuticals, health products are not just, oh, we had an idea and then they're introduced to the market, right? Like there's a lot of work and time and research and trial that goes into those. Maybe is there an average amount of time it goes from kind of like the idea or the first test to when it's introduced to the market and veterinarians are collaborating with you to share this with their clients?
That's a really great question. I mean, from a food animal, any product developed for cattle, pigs, chickens, you're looking at somewhere around a 7 to 10 year lifespan from discovering the powder to getting a final approval with the FDA. A lot of times I talk with a lot of different companies. I talk with a lot of startup companies trying to help them move forward. And they're always like, well, this is an animal product. It should be easier and simpler than a human product. Maybe it's a little bit shorter on the companion animal side for dogs and cats, but once you start putting in that human food safety component into a food animal product, you're essentially providing the exact same toxicology package and data required for first use in humans. So it's the amount of data and the quality that goes into a veterinary product for approval with FDA or any of the other major regions is really close to what's required for a human from a food animal standpoint, because it's about making sure consumption of those commodities are safe for the human.
When we were speaking about the layoffs at the federal level, you mentioned CVM. And I want to dig into that a bit because you had mentioned that's something you wanted to touch on, like CVM and FDA bioequivalence. I don't know anything about what that phrase means. So I'll just leave that for you to explain.
Sure. Along that one, let's first define CVM as the Center for Veterinary Medicine within FDA. That's
Okay.
the part of FDA that's responsible for animal drug approvals,
Okay.
not vaccines, because vaccines are regulated for animals by USDA. So we're just talking about drugs. So when we start to talk bioequivalence, that's how we know you're probably familiar with on the human side generic drugs, and that they're
Yes.
always a little bit cheaper. So bioequivalence is how they establish a generic drug, whether it's human or animal. So they have to be bioequivalent, which means they have to be similar to each other.
Right. Right.
So,
Yes.
in most typical ways, that's done the generic product. The same manufacturing requirements are put in place for a generic product compared to the pioneer or the original approval.
Okay.
Where the difference comes is on a brand new approval, since we know the FDA knows nothing about the product, they require extensive efficacy testing to make sure the drug works, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
safety testing to make sure it's safe to the animal, but also safe for human consumption when we're talking about food animals. Generic companies don't have to do that safety and efficacy testing. They do what's called a
Oh,
bioequivalence study, and it's
okay.
usually done by blood level. And what we mean by blood level is you're comparing, I dose the animal, I look at the plasma profile or the blood profile,
Mm-hmm.
and is it similar to the pioneer, the original approval? And some drugs are more variable than others, some products are more variable, but the whole point is the generic can't be more variable than the pioneer, the original approval. So that
Gotcha.
means they're similar, and it's all done with statistics. It's a significant number of animals, but we do those blood level studies to approve a generic. So that's one of the reasons the generic is usually cheaper, because they haven't spent $4 or $5 million doing all the safety and efficacy testing. They just did a single bioequivalence study.
Because one that is developed with a biowaiver, is that going to be much different or a lot different than one with this blood level bioequivalence?
It's actually then a little bit even simpler for one that has a biowaiver. And you can do there's options for biowaivers on the human side, but in animal health, how CVM looks at it is that the product is an injectable solution, it's eligible to be considered, which means, and why something that's in solution? Well, from a pharmacologist standpoint, if it's in solution, it's readily available to be absorbed. So the absorption isn't affected by the formulation.
Gotcha.
So that's why injectable solutions, inhaled anesthetics. So we use inhaled anesthetics in veterinary medicine all the time. Those are considered because you're just breathing it in, breathing it out.
Okay.
Certain oral formulations, certain tablets, if they dissolve at the same rate, called dissolution, they'll do comparative studies and get a biowaiver there, so they don't have to do the blood level study.
Okay. So waiver of the blood level.
It's waiver of the blood level. I mean, I'll get there. Just give me a second.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. But the whole point is it's behaving the same as the Pioneer. We're not trying to develop a new drug here. We're trying to put something out there that behaves the same and is predictably behaving the same.
Gotcha. So it's predictively behaving the same.
Yes.
So do those, I'm going to generic and I'm use your word Pioneer.
Mm-hmm.
It's already the manufacturing sounds as if it's different, right? But is the quality is the same?
The quality is the same. All the manufacturing, what we call in the industry CMC, chemistry, manufacturing, and control of the manufacturing process. They have to. A generic company has to generate exactly the same data that a Pioneer company did for theirs. So they have control over the manufacturing process.
Gotcha.
Then it comes down to that efficacy and safety. If it behaves the same, either in a blood level study or in vitro, where you're looking at just dissolution of the tablets or the formulation, we're going to assume that it behaves the same in the animal. Okay. And off we go.
So I can envision being at like the pharmacy section at Walmart, right? And I can see like the name brand Dayquil, NyQuil, and then next to it, I think it's like the Great Value Dayquil, NyQuil, but it's not called that, right? And so it's very easy to tell the difference between generic and the name brand one. And I've never had issue, not getting relief when I bought the generic instead of name brand. But how do you know, like, if a producer wants the Pioneer brand, like, how do they know what that is? You know what I'm saying? Like, they have to just Google it and find out which one was first, or what if they want to they are a name brand person and they want to make sure they buy the Pioneer product? Is that something you can tell us? Like, which one is which?
Which one is which? The labels are going to say that. It's going to be, they're going to be branded. If you're looking, and this is one of the unique things about animal health, is that we have what's called branded generics. So they'll actually have a brand name on them. So when you're looking at the label, you're going to look for, if you want the original, if you happen to, that's your preference, you're going to look for an NADA number on it.
Okay, NADA.
If it's a generic, it's going to have an ANADA number on it. So it'll either say NADA and a number, or it's going to say ANADA and a number.
Okay.
The generic is the ANADA number. The Pioneer is the NADA number, and that will be on the box or the package or whatever that you can look for.
Well, so what's on the horizon? What's something that's exciting on the horizon for animal health and pharmaceuticals?
From my perspective, I mean, I work with a lot of startups in my consulting business. There's a lot of work going on right now in the food animal side around sustainability and around environmental impact type stuff. So I think we're going to see a lot of production type drugs and products and solutions that fit into all of those types of situations: reduced waste, better feed efficiency, less reliance on antibiotics, things that deal with environmental impact of methane, those types of things. I think there's a lot of hot products being developed right now. They're several years down the road, but they're coming, and I think they're going to be fantastic for the industry.
Oh, I look forward to that. I mean, you're right. That is the hot topic. I tell people, like, sustainability is not like this buzzworthy trend that's going to go away. Like, sustainability is about the future of agriculture and maintaining our resources in as as well as we can. And that's not something that's going to be like that fad is going to go away, right? So as urban sprawl continues to happen and our population continues to increase, it's going to be more important than ever before. And so I think people who have been kind of averse to the term sustainability or have not liked hearing sustainable food or sustainable beef or regenerative ag or whatever one of those things, they haven't liked hearing those, like they're probably going to have to get used to it and maybe get over that frustration, because it's not going anywhere.
It's not going anywhere. And kind of take a step back, in my opinion, and kind of look at the world. Most of agriculture has been doing this for a long time, because it's not in agriculture's best interest to raise animals in an unhealthy environment, to grow crops in a bad situation where they're damaging the soil. This is something we've been doing for a long time. We're just getting more friendly about how we say it and more proactive about what we do. So I personally think it's always been there. We're being more pointed about how we talk about it.
I agree. It's always been there. There was a phrase that used to go around that was like, farmers and ranchers are the first, like, agriculture conservationists, like that kind of thing.
Right.
And so you're absolutely right. The stuff that's kind of in the spotlight now is sustainability, like rotational grazing and soil quality and water health, and like all that stuff has been around, but we just are having to talk about it. And not a lot of people like to talk about what they do on their ranch or their farm, and so that
Fair enough.
I think that's caused some of the trepidation.
That's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's a good point.
Well, so I touched on this, but you've had this like long career, 30 plus years. How, and I'm sure there's going to be interesting answer for this, but how is animal health and pharmaceutical development, how has that changed over that time?
No, it's not the same. And when I started out 30 years ago, I mean, I won't say that the quality and requirements haven't changed. What I will say is the timeline has changed. When I started out, and I'll date myself, in the early 90s, so 1990s, we would submit our data packages to the FDA, and essentially we'd wait for a response to come back. And it might be 2 months, it might be 6 months, it might be 3 years before we got a response back. And I want to say about 20 years ago, we went through the Animal Drug User Fee Act, ADUFA, and
Mhm.
that put timelines in place so that the companies pay a fee in order to get FDA to review their products. They're reviewing the data. They're not paying them to approve the products. They're paying them to review it and provide the right personnel and the right timelines. So what the companies get out of that is guarantees that the review will be completed in X number of days, depending upon the type of data that's submitted. And to me, that's probably one of the biggest changes I've seen. Is it's a lot more predictable when we'll get a response from FDA. Not when we're going to get an approval, but when we'll get a response.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key differentiator there of whether it's just a response or, boom, a rubber stamp, because it's not a rubber stamp.
So before, you called it ADUFA. Before that, there was no, you just said there's no way to know like how long you'd even get a response for, let alone. So what, I mean, I guess this act was put in place. Did they have to put more people working at FDA? Like, I guess I'm a logistical person. Like, what was the holdup? Like, why would it take 2 months to 6 months or more to get even a response? And how did the legislation change that immediately? Did they hire a bunch more people at FDA?
It allowed them to hire more people because we were now paying user fees, and that money went directly to hiring people and putting them in place to get the reviews done on time.
Oh, I had no idea about any of that. That's wonderful. That's good to know. But from an animal health standpoint, what do you foresee being one of the biggest barriers as we continue into 2025, and the future?
There is a certain amount of uncertainty right now with some of the changes that are going on within the federal government, and how personnel, some of the unknowns about personnel levels and review levels, because we just got word, I think it was Saturday, there was an announcement that there was I want to say, and I'm probably wrong, but about 100 to 150 FDA CVM reviewers, so those that review our products, were laid off. So we're trying to figure out just how real that is and what if any impact is going to happen. And it fits into all the ADUFA fees and everything. Are these people that are paid through ADUFA, or were these federal funds that were being used? So there's a lot of unknowns right now. So for me personally, and the clients that I serve, the next 6 months is going to kind of dictate what happens. We just don't know.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a big difference between, like you said, firing someone who you as animal health companies and consultants pay, and people who are paid by federal dollars. And I think the goal of these layoffs is to cut back on federal expenditures. But if there's no thought being put into where the funding to pay those people is actually coming from, that can provide quite a few setbacks. That's totally understandable.
We just need more information to kind of figure out what's going on and understand the whys. I mean, it's the last thing I want to see in any government is waste, but by the same token, you kind of have to have a plan in mind to get to the end goal.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You can't. Yeah. I echo that completely. Aside from that large barrier, very big barrier, is there anything is there any other barriers or fresh challenges in terms of like testing, or maybe like on the biological level, or on the application level?
And that's a good point. One of the things where I'm wondering what's going to happen is the whole bird flu type situation, because yes, we've seen it in flocks, we've seen it in dairy cattle. One, is it going to move into the beef cattle space? If it does, what's the impact going to be, and how are we going to respond to that? I know that there's at least a couple of vaccines in development, if not already ready to go into market. So how does that play into when we start to look back on COVID and we saw these emergency use authorizations to vaccinate people around COVID? There's some potential to have a similar impact in cattle or birds or whatever through the same process, but is it going to be considered a big enough emergency to actually trigger that? So I'm nervous about having a whole lot of animals die when there's a potential for a preventative measure. So what's going to pull that trigger, and then what that impact is going to be on the end consumer? How is that going to make them nervous about eating meat? Is it going to make them nervous about the cost? Because as supply goes down, cost will go up. So if it's a widespread epidemic, what kind of impact that? So the bird flu is another big unknown to me, just where the impact's going to fall.
We have admittedly not talked about the bird flu on the beef podcast, so I think
Sorry.
No, but it's a topic, and it's relevant because it has been found in dairy cattle. And the last I read, and I haven't really looked into it that closely in terms of how it's affected dairy cattle, because I have a bunch of chickens, a bunch meaning like 20, not, I don't have like a bird barn, but so I'm loving the fact that like eggs are not really hurting my pocketbook at the moment, but but I know it's crossed over in dairy cattle. And last I had read, it wasn't it was knocking back the production of those individual dairy cows, but it wasn't killing them. Is that right?
That's everything I've heard is exactly that. Yes.
Okay. And so but I mean, if it's in a dairy cow, it has a potential to emerge in beef cattle the same, I would assume, if that crossover would happen.
Well, and then you think about dairy beef calves and it being transferred on the farm and ending up in a feedlot or something if it's subclinical. So there are a lot of potential ways that it could get into that channel if we're not staying on top of it.
It's just always developing. And I think we're at this point where we're always going to have I feel like it's always going to be some level of it, because I feel like we had a really bad incidence of bird flu like a couple years ago, and then it felt like we recovered, and now it's back. Am I misremembering that, or is that what actually?
No, that's how I'd remember it. Yeah.
So I just wonder what the future looks like for the poultry industry, and if this occurrence or this widespread occurrence triggers any changes to the industry. Like, I don't know, because it just seems like this has been worse than the last time, but it seems recurring. So at some point I don't claim to have an answer by any means.
And neither do I.
I'm just asking questions, right? So,
but what I'm wondering is, I can remember, and this is again dating myself, I can remember the very strict biosecurity situations for pseudorabies in the swine industry, and pretty much having to scrub in and scrub out to go into a swine facility. I very likely that's what you're going to start to see in the poultry industry, is a lot more biosecurity along those lines. And as if it starts to have a large economic impact on the dairies, you might even start to see that in the milking parlors. With it's not that it's not taken care of and people are being flippant about it, but there's always things you can do more to protect against that, and that's what I suspect we're going to see, is an increase in biosecurity.
It's time for our famous three.
Well, we've reached the time here in the episode where I ask the same questions of every guest. And I did give Dr. Hunter a heads up on this. I don't ever just spring these on our guests. So, but if you're a frequent listener, you know what's coming next. So, Dr. Hunter, what is your favorite beef or cattle related resource? It can be a book or a website. I have one of our guests many months ago said that his favorite resource was his wife, because she managed like the genetics and like the actual herd and the cattle. And he did like the data analysis and things of that nature. So it could be literally anything, but what's your favorite beef or cattle related resource?
For me, it's a little bit more than just beef specific, so I apologize for kind of skirting your answer a little bit. But I deal a lot trying to keep up with what's going on in the science area and everything. So there's several journals I follow, but the big ones are the Journal of Veterinary Pharmacology and Therapeutics and the American Journal of Veterinary Research. Those are my go-to references for what's going on in the state of the art in veterinary research.
Gotcha. I haven't had those before, so that's not. I got something new for sure. That's good. All right. So, what is your favorite non-beef or cattle-related book, or one that you're currently reading?
Okay, so I'm not currently reading. This is a reference book I keep on my shelf, and I've had it on my shelf for probably 20 years now. The book's called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. And
Okay.
for me, what it does is in previous roles, I used to travel internationally quite extensively. And it talks about the various cultures in different countries, how those cultures developed, how behaviors, what are the proper courtesies, what are ways to offend, ways to not offend. And for me,
Oh,
that was my reference. So when I traveled, I'd always go back and review in the book that particular country, to make sure that I was starting off right, wasn't going to do anything intentionally to offend, but
yeah.
also how could I better be a better negotiator and know what their potential hot buttons are. So that book has been a staple for me for 20 years, and I absolutely love it. So Kiss, Bow, and Shake Hands. I recommend it for anybody who does international interactions.
I love that. I just Googled it to like look it up like that, and it has many high star ratings on
Yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That is another one. I've definitely not had anybody answer that, but that sounds like
Good. I like to be unique every once in a while, so
yes,
that's
it
good.
was. It's great. It sounds like a wonderful resource, and it's 45% off on Amazon right now. So there's a little plug for it.
Buy that
That's
sucker now.
wonderful. Okay, and the final question, or final kind of like rapid fire question is: when you think of someone you admire or look up to, what is a characteristic that person possesses that has led them to be successful?
I've always admired folks who can see the big picture. They know where they're at in their career. They can see backwards sort of how everything comes to their point and then see what's going forward, so that they understand how everything fits together. They're not necessarily experts in everything, but they understand how the pieces fit together, because you have to understand to be successful how the pieces fit together and where you fit into that puzzle. So I think that's absolutely critical.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, you can't miss the forest for the trees and be so dialed in on one thing that you miss the big picture. I love that. I truly love that.
Excellent.
Well, Dr. Hunter, that is all the questions and time that we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us after our many times rescheduling. I really did. I really enjoyed it, and I learned so much. I'm going to retain a lot of this and have to re-listen to the episode, honestly, so that I can hear some of those other things again. But if listeners have questions for you or want to learn more about our discussion today, where can they do that?
The easiest way to get a hold of me is on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find there. Just do a quick search. My email's there, and they can reach out to me. but they're welcome. I don't know if you post my email or not, but they're welcome to email me. It's rphunter@thenumber1medicineconsulting.com, and I'm happy to take questions from there.
Well, you heard it here. You can look him up on LinkedIn or his email, and we will be sure to put those in the show notes and the footnotes of the episode for our audience who are interested in contacting you. Just once again, I want to say thank you for being here, Dr. Hunter. I want to thank our episode sponsor, Verbac, for sponsoring the episode. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. And we will meet you back here next week on the Beef Podcast.